Hello, welcome back. We are continuing on through the reproductive system, specifically the female reproductive system. Going to take a look at the uterine cycle. So again, there's some anatomy that goes along with the uterus, the uterine tubes, the fundus, the body, the cervix, the endometrium, the myometrium. So make sure you're comfortable with those terms because now we're going to take a look at what happens to the uterus, again, in that 28-day cycle that is dictated by the ovaries, which will be then dictated by your hypothalamus. That's the hormones. We'll get into that a little bit. All right, so I did want to talk a little bit about the anatomy of the uterine wall, just because that's going to be really important for the physiology of menses. It is divided into your perimetrium, which is your connective tissue, the myometrium, which is all smooth muscle, like a big, thick, smooth muscular wall, and then endometrium, which is kind of regenerative epithelial-like tissue. It's not a true epithelium, but it is most like epithelium if we're going to compare it to a type of tissue. Now, it is very vascular. So the muscle is very vascular, the endometrium is very vascular. But if we take a look at the structure of these vessels, we can actually see some differences in their shape, in their appearance. For your myometrium, you got some blood vessels feeding into it, some arteries. But take a look at the endometrium. We have kind of like an imaginary line here that's separating, this is called the basilar layer from the functional layer. So the basilar layer primarily has what we call straight arteries. So the blood vessels that are feeding into that lowest layer, the part of the endometrium that's closest to the muscle, these are straight. In the functional layer, if you take a look at them, they're super squiggly. They're called spiral arteries because they actually spiral like this. So that anatomy is going to be really important for the physiology of the role of that functional layer of the endometrium. So I wanted to bring your attention to that because that's super valuable for what causes menses, why the vessels are different between straight and spiral. That's going to come into play. So let's take a look. So the uterine cycle has three major phases. We start off with menses. So in a 28-day cycle, day 1 through about 7, again, every woman's going to be a little bit different. Some women are a little bit shorter, some women are a little bit longer, but we'll just say about 7 days. So about 7 days for your menses. This is the loss of the previous growth of the endometrium, and that's the breaking down of that endometrium. And the way that it works, why I showed you the picture of the spiral arteries, is because in that functional layer, so here's your myometrium, okay, here's your basilar zone, and here's the functional zone kind of above that. So this is the myometrium, this is basilar, and this is functional. So if you have those spiral arteries here, the trigger for the loss of that functional layer is a powerful vasoconstriction. So those spiral arteries that are kind of spiraling up into that functional zone, they vasoconstrict. And by doing so, they physically tear that functional layer of the endometrium apart. The blood vessels kind of break themselves, they get damaged. And so what that does is it allows that top layer of the endometrium to be lost. And that's what is lost during a menstruation, is that functional layer of the endometrium. The basilar zone does not have that because those vessels were straight. So if they vasoconstrict, they're just going to get smaller. They're not going to kink and break any tissue. That's important because then the basilar zone is there to regrow the functional zone for the next cycle. We might be saying, well, why the heck would you want to do all this work in the first place? Well, every month the ovary releases the secondary oocyte, halted in metaphase 1, waiting for the sperm to fertilize it. You want a nice fresh endometrium for this fertilized egg to land in. You don't want any old stagnant endometrium. So just like the ovary is on a cycle, the uterus follows that cycle to get rid of any endometrium that was not used in the prior cycle and grow fresh endometrium for the potential of a new fertilized egg that could be coming in. So proliferative phase is about days 8 to 14. So about the next week or so. So here's our basilar zone, myometrium, basilar zone, functional zone. So now in menses, we've destroyed the functional zone. So now what we're doing, we are starting to grow those spiral arteries again. we are starting to increase the glandular growth into this functional zone. Proliferative, it's growing, it's proliferating, it's getting bigger. And then about day 15 to 28, so the last 2 weeks or, plus or minus a few days, depending on your cycle. If you take a look at it, they don't have the zones here, but you might have, it looks like it's really basilar down here. And this is all the functional. It's getting really thick. You can just see this increase in the amount of these secretory glands. There's arteries in there. So these are nutrient glands. They are just being like, oh, a new oocyte, fertilized egg might be coming in and landing. So when it does, we want to make sure it's soft, it's thick, it's vascular, it's got a lot of nutrients. We want to take care of that fertilized egg and give the best chance of success for that particular new life that could be coming down the uterine tubes into the uterus. Okay, so it's getting all ready to go. But what if no implanted egg comes along? Well, we don't want to leave this big, thick, unused functional zone of the endometrium, so we go back here, back to day 1. So we get this powerful vasoconstriction, we destroy all of the functional zone, it gets sloughed off during menses, and we start all over again with proliferative secretory phase. No implantation, cycle it all over again. So this is the uterine cycle. It is the uterus's response to what's happening in the ovary to prepare for the implanted ovum that could be fertilized by the sperm. So in the next slide, this is the big hormone kind of overview. I don't want to talk about these right now, so we're not going to talk about these right now. We're not really going to talk about this or this, but I really wanted to show you how the ovarian cycle lines up with the uterine cycle. I'm going to show this again in the hormones slide. So that's why I crossed out the hormones, because we're going to see that again later. So take a look at what's happening at day 1 through 7. So let me do the highlighter. So in day 1 through 7, this is our menses. Right? So destruction of the functional zone. And if we look at what's happening in the ovary, the egg is just growing, the follicle's growing, the egg is going through meiosis inside of it, kind of going through its stages. Proliferative phase, days about 7 through 14, we can see the follicle is really getting big. We're probably at that secondary oocyte phase, halted in metaphase 2, getting ready for ovulation. And then at day 14, this is our ovulation event. So that tertiary follicle ruptures, the oocyte is captured by the uterine tube. Again, know all of your parts of the uterine tube, brings it down. And by the time, it takes about a week, takes about 7 days from ovulation to implantation, or to, I should say, ovulation to reach the uterus. So in 7 days, take a look at where we're at. Oh my gosh, this uterus is so full of nutrients and blood. So when that egg finally makes its way down here, it's like, yay, if it is a fertilized egg. If it is an unfertilized egg, nothing happens. It just goes on by, just kind of hangs out. There's no signal for implantation to occur. And so if that's the case, if no implantation occurs, then we just take the cycle and go all over again. We have that big, thick functional layer. It's not doing us any good. The egg was unfertilized. So we go back to day 1 and we slough that off. And then it happens every single month. That is the ovarian cycle compared to the uterine cycle. So then when we get to our hormones, we'll actually see those boxes that I X'd off, how the hormones regulate each part of the ovaries and the uterus. It's all super coordinated, which is pretty darn cool. All right, so that is the female uterine cycle, and I will see you next time.